Well, hello, good evening. The new time slot, 8 o'clock, due to popular demand. I had some suggestions that 6 o'clock in the evening was too early for a lot of people because they were coming home from work or whatever. So I've moved it to 8 o'clock, and I think it's probably going to be better all round. Another change is I've opened up am opening up a channel for questions so that we don't have to rely on questions during the session because people have pointed out to me, A, it takes up a little bit of time, but also, as one person pointed out, they want to pay attention to what's going on screen, not spend time writing out questions. So I thought it'd be handy to have a forum where you can drop questions in if you have any. And I have had one just in today from Davika, which I'll attempt to answer later, Davika, if you're there. If not, if we don't get time, because it's a fairly long answer to a short question, um, and I've got a lot to get through now. So if we don't get round to it tonight, I'll find another way. I believe I've got you on the mailing list, and I can respond to you that way. The other thing I'd like to say is I'm working from presentation, a keynote presentation tonight, PowerPoint for those of you who don't use a Mac, and called Getting the Life You Want. And it's based on something that I've been doing for a number of years now when I ran webinars internationally, actually, when they started up in popularity about 4 or 5 years ago, I suppose. And I recently unearthed the archive, and I thought, well, I got some good titles here, so I'll tweak them a bit and put them out on a Monday evening because it's a better way to get started with this, I think, and see what that prompts in terms of responses from you out there. And speaking of responses, it would be great if you could send me a text message. You've got a text box, I think, on the bottom right of your screen, probably. I've got mine over here on a separate screen. But it'd be great if you could just send me give me a signal, say hi, or where are you, something like that, so I know roughly how many people I'm speaking to and that type of thing. And it's just easier when one can visualize one's audience. And of course, I've been doing this for a long time, but online is a new medium for me. I've only been doing this for 3 or 4 years and really not that consistently. And one of the reasons I've started these regular Monday evening chats is because I want to get more familiar and more comfortable and iron out a few wrinkles in the technology because my paid courses go live quite soon, and I want to make sure everything's in place and we haven't got any problems with that. It's also much nicer speaking to my audience and getting some feedback, getting some questions, and finding out if I'm on the right track with what I'm doing. So tonight, getting the life you want, intention and goal setting. I'm going to rattle through this. These meetups are supposed to last half an hour, 30 minutes, something around there. I'll try and get through this in that time. It's more likely to be a little over that, I would think. And as ever, if you've got questions, hi Robert, Nigeria. Wow, good to see you and good to hear that you're there. I guess you're on a similar time scale to us. That's great. Anyway, thanks very much for logging in, Robert, and I hope this is useful for you. So, what's this topic about? Getting the life you want. Well, it's based partly on requirements from the business world a number of years ago about goal setting, but it's also very much interwoven with my sort of philosophy of life and what I've done in my own life, and the fact that I meet so many people in a bit of a quandary because they seem to be living either somebody else's life or a life they never would have designed for themselves, mainly because of demand. And we're all familiar with that situation these days where your feet don't seem to touch the ground. Many people, middle aged and upwards, are being squeezed between children who haven't quite left home yet at 37 or however long they stay around. My four have gone and they're all doing okay, thank you very much, but that's because I'm an uncharitable father and I don't give them house room. We get on very well, by the way, but I think 20 is enough, 21 max. They didn't quite all make it by that time, but I have good relations with them and they're all doing really well, and I'm very proud, needless to say. However, many people are squeezed by late departers, if I can call them that, and then, of course, aged relatives and others that we care for. Um, and if you're still working as well, that can get a bit much. So let me rattle on with this. You can't change the situation, of course, very often. I understand that. And I don't want you to think I'm preaching some bulletin of American West Coast individualism. I'm talking about what works. And all I would say is suck it and see. Try it and see what happens. But as you will find out in this talk, I believe anyway, and you may agree with me when you think about it, that actually we are our own worst problem. We are the biggest obstacles to our own progress in life very often, because we get shackled by all sorts of things that are inconvenient to change. We don't always want to change them. We'd like to, we don't want to, it's inconvenient. And then we make up a neat little narrative or some stories to make sure that we can't change it, so we say. So modern living requires us to make a lot of choices constantly, thousands a day, possibly into the hundreds of thousands if you count everything that's all the unconscious decisions we're making. Just about everything we do, we're making decisions. We are decision-making machines or creatures. And these choices, as I've touched on, are very often not our own, but they accumulate and shape our lives. And all of a sudden, your life's gone. You've reached middle age or later, and then suddenly, bang, you haven't achieved those ambitions. And then we've got that horrible phrase, creates in my view anyway, a bucket list. Who on earth wants a bucket list? Just live your life, you know. That's my moderate view, as you've probably gathered. Anyway, it's personal prejudice. And we lose touch with our aims and ourselves, and worse, very often we lose touch with those around us, those we count on, our partners if we have them, and possibly the pressure of caring means that we lose touch in some way with those we are caring for. So I'm talking here about developing a series of new habits, or developing new habits, and that's really what I'm going to hit on later. Increasing demands mean less time. We know that. I mean, my website gets anything between 200 and 500 hits a day, and 50% of those, approximately speaking, and I check the figures probably once a week at least, about 50% of those hits are people looking for information on how to be more resilient. And I've run a survey. I've got a survey running on my blog as well, which is tracking what people's interests are. And for most people, it's work and life, but work tends to predominate. That tends to be most important. So, as I've said, I'm not going to rattle on through all these points on these slides. And by the way, these slides, this presentation, will be available on my blog. So I'll tell you now, because I've noticed we've got some internet problems here. Some local contractor apparently stuck a series of fence posts through the internet cable somewhere in our region. And for the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's been very, very up and down, including 10 minutes before I fired up tonight. Suddenly I was being told I hadn't got sufficient bandwidth. I have now, but if you lose me, this will be recorded and it'll be on YouTube, so you'll be able to catch up that way. And also, I would just say that the keynote presentation, the presentation I'm using here, will be downloadable via my blog. So if you remember nothing else, remember www.barrywinbolt.com. Go there tomorrow and find the post under the blog heading, which will have a link in it to the document that you can download from Google Docs. So you'll be able to pick up, you don't have to make notes, and you'll be able to pick up the presentation that I'm using. I've got in this slide here, back to the topic, we don't take time sufficiently to reflect on our successes. Now, one of the things that we often overlook in life is that we are completely overrun with the numbers of successes we have. We're not trained to think like this, which is sad, but we are very quick to think about our perceived failures. What I'm talking about by successes is, I mean, I just made it up and down the stairs about 30 times today and I haven't fallen over. Now, that's something of a record for me. These are successes. I count them, you know. I mean, I make a point. In fact, there's on my blog, there's a download. There's an exercise. I'm not sure exactly where it is now, but I'm sure if you put successes into the search bar on the website, I've got an exercise you can download free. All of this stuff's free because that's the sort of person I am. I can't help it. So you can download this exercise called Successes. Basically, what it says is just spend a couple of minutes each evening reviewing what's gone right for you in the day. Train your mind to look for success. Train your mind to look for the good stuff. Optimists live longer, whatever the pessimists say. And now, it's not to say that if you are a pessimist, by the way, this is another subject altogether, but if you are a pessimist, I haven't got down on pessimists. A bit of healthy pessimism would have saved me many heartaches in my life, because I'm the sort of optimist who never books a hotel on the basis that it's going to be there when I need it. And of course, surprise, surprise, we know how that ends. But generally speaking, an optimistic outlook helps people through life. Now, I'll be covering this in more detail on my training course on emotional intelligence and a number of other areas later, but and a course on resilience that's coming out. So, review your successes. That's a little tip I would suggest. I'll come back to that, but we can end up, my point is, for these first two slides, we skate through life. We have demands we feel are not of our making. We feel unable to control them, perhaps, or respond to them adequately very often. And then we get the pesky guilt creeps in, most useless emotion in many cases. Of course, it plays a useful purpose if you have done something wrong. But unhealthy guilt is basically rubbish. I'm a bloke, of course, and men don't feel as much, and I can probably hear a cry of protest from guilty feeling men out there, but generally speaking, I seem to get through pretty well. Lack of concern, I think, or something. Anyway, so we go through life picking up all this stuff, and suddenly we think, oh, hang on, my life's not fulfilling or fulfilled. And I was thinking about this recently, and it occurred to me that there's a play on words there somewhere, because actually many people have a life that is filled. It's completely full. There's no room for anything else, but it's not fulfilled. So I think there's a distinction to be made here. Go for fulfilling, don't go for filling. And think about it in terms of a diet. And anyway, that's a whole other subject. I'll get off that. So feeling unfulfilled and satisfied. Do you feel unfulfilled and satisfied? I'm very sorry if you do. I don't, actually. I'm not boasting. But it's an attitude, and I have my days, by the way, but I don't waste time feeling unfulfilled, because I'll wait till I feel better to review that particular question, and then, hey presto, I get a nice answer. So we can take control of our lives, and there's no time like now. Forget the bucket list, forget all that stuff you're going to do one day, because one day we'll know. And unfortunately, and on a serious note here, when it does happen, that suddenly life is taken away from somebody you know and love, it's a very serious topic, of course, but it has a salutary effect. And as anybody who's been through that situation will tell you, suddenly you think, there's value in every moment, in every day. Now, I know that sounds a bit trite, a bit hackneyed, and I can't say I live my life like that. I wish I could. Probably be a pain in the neck if I did, but however, don't wait, folks. Now is the time to start making change. If you feel unfulfilled in any way, if you would like to change the quality of your life to be something more fulfilling. Takes a little time, but not much each day. Now I'm thinking maybe 10 minutes a day. Is that too much? 10 minutes a day to stake out for you, just you, with a notepad perhaps, and you can design the life you want. And that's where it starts, because as Einstein and many other people have said, it starts with daydreaming, it starts with the imagination. If you can't visualize what you might be having in your life, then you might not wind up with it. Think about going into a restaurant as you run down the menu, running past your mental taste buds, the various dishes on the menu, kind of mentally tasting them in a way. You're visualizing what that meal might be like, on the plate, on your palate, in your stomach maybe, I don't know. And it's precisely like that. It's just the same with life, really. So I think I'm a big advocate of daydreaming. I've done it a good bit in my life. I'm a big advocate of taking 5 breaks a day to do it. Um, these days, my life is one big break, so I don't need to take 5 breaks. But when I was working, I would regularly take 2 to 5 minute breaks to check in with myself and see how I was feeling and so forth. So you can design the life you want, but there are threats. Time is a threat, of course, and I'm just checking the time here. So I've been going 15 minutes. That's brilliant. About on target, I would say, for the length of the presentation. Um, yes. Okay. A cryptic message from Charles. Maybe I can work that out later. Um, and I can do it 31 times. Okay, well, I'll figure that out later. Maybe code. So there are threats, yes. Now, what are these threats? Well, ourselves, as I touched on earlier. The first thing is we like sameness. Whatever we say, we like sameness. Unless you're one of the very few people who's a bit of a rebel or a bit of a, I don't know, a bit odd, maybe, like me. Um, and even I, of course, I profess not to, but there's a lot of sameness in my life. And we try and keep things the same. So change feels odd. And that's one of the first things that I notice when I'm speaking to people who are going through major life change, whether it's loss, bereavement, being made redundant, marrying, having children, any of those kind of stages in life, is that people seem intent on recreating what they had when they're in this lull, in this doldrum space, as I call it. And that's what human beings seem to do. A relationship breaks up, you rush out and try and recreate it. Get another one. Same model, a couple of years younger. Same with a car. Um, or a job, you lose your job. Or maybe you're not doing too well in your job and you get made redundant. I'm not saying there's a link between those two things, by the way. And people then promptly, quickly, too quickly, I think, usually, try and recreate what they had. Now, there may be a financial necessity in that if it's your work. But we are creatures that need time to digest what's going on, and change is a physical set of physical characteristics. A change like a moving house, having a child, getting married, going on holiday. These are all changes. There are physical manifestations that produce change, but the psychological adaptation to change is known as transition, and that can take a lot longer. So don't rush to fill that gap. Don't rush in there to recreate. Maybe you need that time out to think. Maybe being a bit depressed about it and a bit fed up about it is actually there for a purpose. If you think about it in evolutionary terms, if we've evolved still with the ability to depress, I mean, I know it's going a bit haywire these days in terms of statistics. Fact is, we are able to go inside, become introverted, withdraw. I wonder why. And there may be times in our lives when we really need to do that. So don't rush to recreate the past, I would be saying. Making decisions I'm talking about the sinister forces against us. Making decisions is easy, but carrying them out is not so easy. We possess a powerful drive to keep things as they are, and we'll make up stories to excuse ourselves from making the change. We all have said in our lives, I'm sure, that, say, for example, if a relationship at work was giving us trouble or something else was giving us a bit of a problem, we'd rattle off our good intentions at 4 a.m., even make notes about them when we're awake through the night. And then when the time comes, we don't do it because it makes us feel uncomfortable, because it's a change in behavior, because it's unusual. But the point is, we are meant to learn through that and grow and develop and get over it, basically. But of course, we're afraid of that. It doesn't feel very nice. And I've been there, we've all been there. And then, as if that's not enough, okay, so you design a wonderful new life for yourself and you get these ideas. I can remember years ago when I said to people I was going to be a writer, I stopped saying it because they would just laugh. I knew I would. I knew I would when I left school. But it took me until I was 40-ish to write my first book, although I'd been writing in between. I didn't even sit down and try until that time. And then when I did, and when I decided to do it, hey presto, I found a publisher. I even got an advance, which is unheard of these days. and spent it, of course, before I wrote the book. That's another story. Isn't that what advances are for? Gave me time to think. So, and then, of course, people around us will say, well, you're okay. What's wrong? Stay as you are. Don't do this, do that. But they feel uncomfortable with change. They're even more uncomfortable with us changing because we may be one of their reference points. So it's unsettling for everybody. And we tend to avoid it, and we tend to find reasons not to do it. So what I'm advocating is a purposeful life, thinking consciously, taking time, 10 minutes a day I've suggested, notepad, piece of paper. Doesn't matter when, but the important thing is no distraction. It's also important that you've set up the time in a kind of contract with yourself. It's not something you'll do if you get time. This is a priority scheduled item in your day. It may be that you get to work and you slope off to the toilets and shut the door and take 10 minutes, or it may be that you go off for a cup of coffee and sit quietly and think, go and sit in the park, whatever it happens to be. But you take those 10 minutes to daydream. And here's what you daydream about. Now, it's fine to have, say, a long-term ambition, maybe where you want to be in 10 years. But we need a little more than that. 10 years is a long way off, if you're lucky. So, by the way, it's not a long way off when you're looking back on it. It's a long way off when you're looking ahead to it. I can say that from experience. But the point I'm making is that you need, I would say, 1 year to 3 year goals, something like that. Now, don't run away from the idea of goals. I'm not really talking about goals in the sense that they get bandied about so much these days as targets to be hit and all that. I'm talking about having a crisper and clearer idea, a vision, which comes about through daydreaming, doodling, and just doing nothing in particular, but in a specified way for 10 minutes a day. And then when you've finished your 10 minutes, doesn't matter what's happened and what you got on your piece of paper, you stop. And then same time, next day, you do the same thing, approximately the same time. Try and keep it the same time if you can. And you wait for something to emerge. And what you need to do, of course, is find out what you want. But you probably won't be able to because it's buried too deeply. If you can find out what you want, it'll be because you know what you want. And you do know what you want, at least you know what you don't want. And look at what it is you want to construct in your life. Now, this is daydreaming, this is fantasy time, this is visualizing time. It doesn't have to be monitored, it doesn't have to be edited, it doesn't have to be, oh yes, but, and above all, not that. It has to be simply daydreaming, as I've said. And the reason it has to be in that sort of soporific state almost when you're doodling and daydreaming is that you're actually using the mind differently at that time. And so you should be less cluttered. You'll train yourself into it. You'll be less cluttered by the daily encumbrances. And one of those daily encumbrances is that voice on your shoulder, or is it this shoulder? I don't know, one of them, or maybe over your shoulder. That voice that's telling you all the things you can't do, telling you all the reasons that you're wasting your time, telling you all of that stuff that wants to keep you in line. And that's what you need to switch off and get away from. So you need to start the process of figuring out what you want. And you need to be brave about that because, of course, when you figure out what you want and you haven't got it, then that's a tough question. What do you do about it? You either scurry back into your hole and sit where you were and recreate the past and wait for your bucket list to become a necessity, or you get on with it and enact something about your ambitions and your desires. So it seems simple, and I think it's incredibly simple, but I never said it was easy. Actually, it takes commitment, it takes courage, and I think that's probably the primary reason that most of us don't do it more often. And that's not to say that we're not courageous people, but it takes a conscious act of will to think and live consciously about what you want to have happening in your life and what you want to be free of. And the difficult part about this is that so many of us have been so conditioned by circumstance, by life, by upbringing, that we have to scrape away at that years of encrusted detritus that's getting in the way of us daring to think, what is it that we want for ourselves? And trusting that as well. So I would think this is a process of at least 3 weeks, something like that. Personally, I would say it should be a lifelong process of review from time to time. But that's here endeth lesson one. I think that's a very important aspect. If you do no more than that for the next month, and actually give yourself permission to do that, and allow yourself doodle time or whatever you want to call it, to daydream, and start to record some of those thoughts in some way. Get yourself a nice little notebook so you look very cool sitting in the coffee shop, and or wherever you happen to be, and jot down. And you can't really beat. I know I was going to wave my phone about. I haven't got it here, but yeah, great, all this technology, love it, but you can't beat a pencil or one of those. You see that pen? Yeah, you can't beat it. Something else happens, and I'm a lazy writer, but there you go. It helps the process of thinking. That's really what I'm saying. So, step one, doodle time, 10 minutes a day, regularly staked out for you, privately. It can be on the commute if you can put your headphones on or shut your eyes or something. But other than that, don't try and do it in company, I suggest. And of course, you don't need to share these thoughts or ideas, they're just for you. Because after all, everybody's going to think you're barking, so why bother? Keep it to yourself, would be my advice, until you know what you're doing. Remember, as one of my sons once said to me, intention creates opportunity. I've put possibilities here, but he said intention creates opportunity, which I thought was a very insightful thing for him to say. Once you know what you intend to do, have you ever noticed this? You intend to go on holiday to a certain destination. All of a sudden, you start seeing opportunities. You start seeing brochures, and I don't mean because you go and get them. I mean things fall on your path that relate to that. We can foster an attitude that promotes well-being, and this is all part of the same mix. It really is a question of mastering our own attitude about and being fixated enough about making ourselves important enough. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not preaching some West Coast of America individualistic gospel here. We are collective, we are social beings, we have responsibility for others, we live in collectives, we live in families, and of course we love and care for each other on a good day. And I'm not suggesting you relinquish all that, but within that, if you're not the best person you can be, you won't be the best person for those other people. And if you're being crushed under the weight of unfulfillment, or maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but if things aren't as good as you want them to be, well, point one, that may be necessary at the moment, stick with it. But if it's been dragging on quite a time, it may be time for change. And then what I'm saying is, I think, relevant. And once you start to do these things that I'm talking about, first one is this daydreaming idea, then it starts to become automatic. What you're doing, in fact, is surreptitiously retraining your mind to work differently for you and to work with you, not against you. The other thing that's worth reviewing, and you can download plenty of checklists on the web if you want to, but is to really know what your values and attitudes are. You know, are you, I guess we'd all say we're honest, we'd all say we have integrity, but are you in a job, for example, where the job involves you to be, maybe dishonest is too strong a word, but you work in the interests of the employer and you don't feel entirely, if you were on the receiving end of that, you wouldn't feel entirely comfortable, for example. You know, this produces a schism in us, this produces a conflict. So we really need to know what our values are and live by our values. So attitude is one point. Giving ourselves the freedom to daydream is another. But also truly understanding who we are as human beings. And by the way, by that I mean what our strengths are. What are you good at? Now, you can go to a website called VIA, something or other. If you just do VIA strengths on Google, you'll come up with there's a checklist of 24 what Martin Seligman called signal strengths. He's the granddaddy of positive psychology and a very influential and brilliantly clever man. had written a number of books and done some world-breaking research on it, first of all into depression, but later on positive psychology came about because of his efforts. And he came up with 24 what he calls signal strengths, and these are the strengths that things like integrity, courage, curiosity. I'm high on curiosity. I wasn't surprised to find out. In fact, it's my strongest characteristic, and so forth. And you can do this test. It probably takes 10, 15 minutes, I guess, and they'll send you all these nice, pretty diagrams and stuff. They're not trying to analyze you or tell you what you should be doing in life, but when you know what your strengths are, I think it's useful for two reasons. One, you can play to them, and two, you can strengthen those where you may need a little bit more in that area. So think about it like that, and you can check on your strengths in that way, and in some way that also helps you think about who you are as an individual and what you hold dear in life and what are your values. I'm not talking about people here for now. And as I said, just to recap, I'm not preaching individualistic or selfish behavior. I'm talking about getting our own house in order so that we're some good to the rest of the world. And then it starts with a bit of an inventory on your life. And that's what I'm talking about here. Now, it shouldn't be a down moment. It shouldn't be a wake-up call or a midlife crisis or any of those things. Just find out what you want is an exercise. Work on the basis of what you're good at, what your strengths are, what you have, skills, talents, qualities, experience. Now, we all have them. I see clients coming to see me in this room usually. Whoops, hit the microphone. All the time, and it's amazing that people just totally underestimate how rich they are as people and what they have. Just in a 15-minute conversation, they divulge tremendous skills and talents, but they're not seeing them. And I'm not talking about concert piano playing or ballet dancer or walking a tightrope. I'm talking about things they've done for other people, just the stuff that keeps society going. And it may, in some cases, be a skill for survival against terrible odds, whatever it happens to be. So do some sort of inventory and list your skills, talents, qualities, experience, and so on and so forth. Not like a CV, but as a basis for starting to appreciate who you are and value yourself as a human being. And from that point, you start to set a few goals, plan to enrich your life. Now, they can be small goals. For example, we have a new cinema not far from where I live in a town a few miles away. And it's a very nice place to go. And they have an unconventional program of films, which is the sort that my wife and I live. So we can make a program, right, we'll make sure we go once a week wherever possible. Things like that. Give yourself pleasure, give yourself a break, plan it in. Ditto with the people you know and love. Schedule time with them rather than doing duty calls. But when you are there with them, do it purposefully, do it deliberately, and spend that time. But don't do that if you don't feel available to do it or if it doesn't fit with your plan. Sometimes you have to, of course, but I'm talking now about in an ideal world. Plan to enrich your life. Think about the small things, which would enrich your life. And if they don't enrich your life, question them as goals. Now, they may still be valid goals if they fit underneath the umbrella of that purpose somewhere. So, for example, you may be doing a job you really don't like in the interests of paying your way through college or in the interests of hanging on there until you can buy a property. If it's a part of the plan, that's okay. But if it doesn't fit under any of those headings of your intentions, then why would you be doing it? And I know there's a story, isn't there? There's no other work about, or there's nothing else you can do, or there's nothing else you know how to do. Well, you can believe that if you want to. So monitor your progress. Keep a journal. Keep a little book. Monitor your progress. Notice what's changing for the better. Now, I talked about an exercise where you review your successes each day at close of play, maybe before bed. Just run through what's gone well for me today. You won't last long. If you're like me, you'll be asleep after you've had a couple of successes, and that's enough anyway. But list the positive things. But at the same time, you can also ask yourself what you have done. What's better? What's taken me one step closer to my goal? Or if it hasn't taken me one step closer to my goal, how come I've managed to stay in the same place and not move backwards? That too is positive, isn't it? It's progress. It's being able to hang in there. So, and finally, reward yourself. Give yourself treats now and again. Give yourself permission, and maybe even link them to things that you've promised yourself you will do. Now, another word of advice here, which I've dished out a lot. As you know, I'm a therapist, I'm a counsellor. We don't give advice. So here's some advice. Don't try. Whenever you catch yourself saying, I will try, da 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 da, whatever it happens to be. Actually, it should be da 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 da, that way, shouldn't it? Anyway, never mind. Whenever you hear yourself saying you'll try, people who try generally don't do. And I often wonder about that word try. Why would I try to do something? I don't ever try to do something I succeed at. I always do it. And I don't know I'm going to succeed, by the way. But I don't start out with the idea of trying something. I might try key lime sorbet, for example, because I don't know what it tastes like. Or I might try Capstan Full Strength if I was a smoker. Do they still make those? But I'm not going to try to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up at 8 o'clock, and if I can't wake up, I'll make sure something wakes me up. But I'll get up at 8 o'clock, because why bother trying? That's just that's an escape route, really, isn't it? So be cautious about that word try, I would say. Just a side comment there. How are we going on time? Brilliant. 36. Always in the company of good people. Okay. Charles said, don't you think, Barry, the different stages of life have a natural effect on the desire for change? The more mature, the less of a need to upset the apple cart. Yeah, Charles, that's one of those stories, isn't it? That may be true for many people, and I'm not knocking it. And yes, I do. I would say even more, actually, speaking from personal experience and experience of those around me, that we become less agile at handling change psychologically, and of course probably physically, and we like stability, and when we get to certain stages in life, of course we want to be settled. So absolutely, Charles, I quite agree with that. But it's that phrase, upset the apple cart, because sometimes there might be a rotten apple in there and you need to upset the apple cart. So yes, the desire does go, and if you're happy with that, absolutely fine. I'm not knocking it. That's really all I've got to say. So thank you very much for that point. I've just placed Charles 50 seconds. I just placed you, Charles. Hi. Thank you for that input. Yes. So the clue's in the name, wasn't it? So let's have a look at goals for a moment. It's been said in the areas I work in that goals fail because they're poorly constructed. And certainly when I'm working with clients, we set goals that are achievable for them. Otherwise, they're not really goals, they're aspirations. And sometimes that means downgrading a goal to make it safe to try, for example, or safe to take the first step towards. Perhaps I shouldn't have said try in view of what I said a couple of minutes ago. So here's how goals should be constructed. First of all, they should be positively stated. So my goal is to live in Buenos Aires by 2030, for example. Or my goal is to have a lifestyle which means that I only need to work 3 days a week, for example. So it's positively stated. When you state a goal as a negative, well, what I want is not to be bothered by these negative thoughts. Well, in order to not be bothered, you have to think about being bothered. So you've recreated it straight away. So get rid of the negative goals. Anytime you come up with a negatively stated goal, restate it as a positive goal. So if you don't want to be having the negative thoughts, what will you be doing in place of that? Well, I'll have a clear head. I have a clear mind. Fine. Okay. So you want to have a clear mind. That's what you'd like to have. Yep. Okay. So what does a clear mind mean to you? What's going on in a clear mind? Are there pictures? Are there sounds? Are there smells? Is it what's happening in a clear mind? And then we have a conversation about where we want to go. Goals must be your own and within your control. And that's, of course, what I'm talking about here tonight. That really is what it's about, because very often we're trying to live according to somebody else's goals. And sadly, for us, I mean, goals for us, sadly, our education system works like that. And we very often get quite an advanced age realizing we're still living a life somebody else wanted for us. And so much so that we perhaps haven't even reviewed our own ambitions truly. A goal has to be specific and measurable and achievable. Think about it in terms of going to Paris or Stockton-on-Tees, I don't know. Think of it as going to a town. You're going to go to a town, it's 50 miles away. Your goal is to get to that town. You know the name of the town, you know the route approximately that you'll be taking, and you know roughly how long it'll take. Now, that's not a bad starting point for a journey. You may not know the way exactly, but you can find your way because you know what your end point is. On the other hand, if I have an appointment in Stockton-on-Tees, I think that's in the Midlands, isn't it? Wherever it is. Apologies if there's anybody out there from Stockton-on-Tees. And I simply set my sights on going somewhere north of where I live, because I live on the south coast, for about X number of miles. I could wind up anywhere. And yet that is the vague way we kind of handle our lives. So there's nothing wrong with having a clearer idea of where you want to end up at a certain time. But it needs to be specific, measurable and achievable. So you know when you've got there. If I can't recognise Stockton-on-Tees, I'll drive straight past it. Or stop too soon, maybe, and then things won't work out as planned. It has to be small enough to start easily. Now, another thing that people often fail with their goals because they place them way up in the stratosphere, and you just can't see the individual steps. If your goal is to earn a six-figure salary, let's say, and you're out of work, probably you need to break it down a little bit. Maybe like, get a job. In fact, I'd say you need to break that down, apply for a job, and so on and so forth. If you want to do something meaningful in life, well, refer back to the earlier part of this talk when you get in touch with your own values and what is meaningful for you, rather than some job that has meaningful written all over it. I remember too that it's often said these days, what with the advent of the internet and everything else that's going on, that the 20 top jobs in 10 years haven't been invented yet, or is it in 20 years? So it's time for daydreaming, because you may be one of those people who creates that very job. And think specific, measurable, realistic, time-sensitive, achievable, smart goals. Think about if your goal doesn't fit those criteria, if what you're saying is a goal, then it's probably not a goal. It's probably an aspiration or a daft idea or something. Sorry about that, folks. Right, coming along right along here. I've only got a couple more slides to go. No more questions at the moment. I said I'd talk about Davika's question. I'll touch on that if I get time, but time is getting on. I'm taking up quite a lot of your time. So thank you for hanging in there, folks. And please remember, this will be on YouTube, I think probably by tomorrow morning. So you'll be able to find it and watch it again if you want to, or forward it to other people. You can also leave comments, and I'd be very happy to have any comments, or email me. See if it's if I'm doing the right sort of thing and or wasting your time. It'd be good to know. So what I'm saying in summary is that I've got to stop fiddling with my trackpad. The art of conscious living is becoming more aware of one's own identity and purpose. and develop habits of reflection in order to do that and to develop those ideas and to keep them alive. And we hear a lot of talk about mindfulness today, these days. I think there's quite a lot of misunderstandings about it, but it doesn't take an 8-week course to be mindful. It simply takes you to be conscious of being conscious about your thinking and taking a little time to reflect on yourself and go inwards and deal with the inner stuff a bit. Of course, there's more to mindfulness than that, but at its simplest, it is really reflection and the ability to be self-absorbed to a point where you can free up the unconscious mind and get in touch with what gets called intuition or instinct, and find out more about yourself that way. Self-observation, self-inquiry, and mindful action. And by mindful action, I mean doing things consciously and deliberately for a purpose, and actually experiencing them as you go through them. Not everything has a purpose, of course, and we have to deal with a lot of dross in life. Of course we do, but the big stuff, the main stuff, we can take time to make sure that it makes sense to us and we know why we're doing it. I think it was Daniel Goleman who wrote Emotional Intelligence. I think it was he who said that the hallmark of an emotionally intelligent person is that they know why they're making the decisions they are making, rather than just going along mindlessly. And understand how your actions enrich your life. And there's a subtext to that, which is that if you're not getting more enrichment than unrichment in your life, and I don't mean money here, if you don't feel more fulfilled than simply filled or unfulfilled, then the balance needs adjusting. And that's what today has been about, really, this evening has been about. Now, I think that there was a little story. I was working with a chap years and years ago when I was training as a therapist, and he just lost his job. He worked for a charity. Irish man, can't remember his name, sorry, sadly. And he just lost his job with a small charity. They got a new boss. And one day he was sitting, as he did, with his feet on the desk, staring into the middle distance. And his boss poked her head round the door and said, Declan, let's call him Declan, what are you doing? And he said, I'm working. And she said, you don't look as if you're working to me. And he said, well, I'm thinking, but that's working. And she said, well, I expect better, or something like that, and stalked off. Came back a little later, and there he was again doing the same thing. This went on a number of times, and he got more and more obtuse about it and would simply say, look, I'm working. Well, he didn't stay in the job very long. He got eased out. But I think that really highlights something for me, which is that we don't value thinking enough. We think doing things is what matters. We think action is what matters. But actually, thought precedes action. Attitude precedes everything. So if you don't have some idea of a space when you can do the thinking, it's not going to happen by accident. And the reason I've suggested doing 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, whatever it happens to be, is we have to train our minds to behave and do what we need them to do for us, rather than running around and doing what our mind's telling us to do because it's filled with claptrap that we've picked up over the years. So master your attitude, understand your goals, and investigate your sense of purpose. I hesitated because I thought it said instigate, but investigate your sense of purpose. Really inquire, be curious about your sense of purpose. What are you here to do? What makes you valuable to the human race? What makes you valuable to you? And focus on your strengths. Do an inventory of your strengths. I mentioned the VIA strength inventory, or whatever they call it, which is on the VIA website. And you Google VIA strengths and you can do it, and it's all free, and that's wonderful, like a lot of stuff on the web, like this. And create an attractive future rather than flee the past. Now, I would just say that I think is really an important closing message, which is it's always easier and safer and more successful to go towards what you want rather than trying to flee what you don't want in your life or anywhere else. I can combine this with Davika's question, which was that past hurts. She said, I've jotted it down here. Pain caused by past hurts causes us to lash out because we're struggling to cope. We don't mean to hurt the people around us, but that's the way it comes out. If I've understood, Davika, if I've understood the question correctly, the point. Any tips? Well, the first tip I would say is, it really hinges on what I've been saying today. If you are aiming to be the person you want to be, rather than trying to flee the person you don't want to be, then you have a game plan, in a way. So when I was teaching conflict resolution, which I did for a number of years, I would always say, become a student of harmony. It's easier to go towards peace than it is to sort out a conflict. And somebody has to start the conversation around peace between, I was talking usually between two people. Probably occurs in war. It means would be the same in wars as well, except that wars are political acts. They're not really conflicts in the sense that I'm talking about it here. So I would say, Davika and anyone else, that create the image of the you that you want and go towards it. Now, in this process, as Davika said, past hurts, I don't know what they involve, and I don't know whether they are past hurts in a particular relationship and you're lashing out at somebody else in that relationship as a result of past hurts, or whether they are past hurts somewhere else in life and you brought them into this phase of your life. I just don't know from what you told me. But the tip I would say is to start to create, forget the hurts, put them on the back burner at least as much as you can, and forget the bad stuff, and start designing the you that you want to be and go towards it. And that really summarizes what I've been saying here today. And of course, as I've also said, the obstacle to that is ourselves, and we'll come up with lots of reasons that we can't do that. But I hope I've knocked a little bit of a hole in some of those limiting beliefs, or given you food for thought. Anyway, this is Barry Winbolt. I'm saying thank you very, very much for being here, and thank you for those people who've sent questions and points in, particularly Charles and Robert. Other names I don't have. And I'll be same place, same time next week. New topic next week. I haven't decided what it'll be yet, but if you've got one you want me to talk about, get onto the blog, send me a comment or send me an email, and I'll do what I can. So thank you very much and have a good week, and been really nice talking to you. Goodbye.